Hi, everybody. My name is Carl Darden, and I'd like to welcome and thank all of you for joining us today here on Navy Sports Central. I'm your host, and this is the official podcast of the Navy Sports Nation, where we take a deeper dive into Navy sports. In this episode, we'll wind up our preview of the Navy defense by taking a look at the secondary. And to do that, I'll be joined by a former Navy defensive back who will also share some of his experience from playing on the sprint football team. Kind of a 2-for-1 deal today, so stay with us. We'll be right back. Okay, welcome back to Navy Sports Central. Whether you are a returning listener or checking in for the first time, thanks for making us part of your day. We're going to jump right into things here in a little bit, but first I wanted to give you guys some background on a varsity sport that I didn't even know existed at the Naval Academy until I got there. Back then it was referred to as lightweight football or 150s football because the weight limit was 158 pounds. Now, over the years, that limit has bumped up to 178 pounds. That was done back in 2017. And by the way, it did kind of rise gradually. It just didn't go straight from 158 to 178. But it makes sense that they did raise it up because today's athletes are just bigger and stronger. And just so you know, the average weight of the Navy offense and defense based on the most recent depth chart is about 230 pounds. Anyway, the cool thing is that for those guys who love playing football, there was still a way to do that at the Naval Academy without having to deal with somebody who was roughly 50 pounds heavier on average. And they could do that by playing what we now know as sprint football, which brings us to our guest for this episode. He is originally from the Chicago suburb of Melrose Park, Illinois, where he played defensive back and wide receiver. He ran track for a couple of years in the spring as well. And he was also recruited by the Air Force Academy before he finally decided to go to Navy, where his brother graduated 3 years before. And while he was at Annapolis, he played cornerback on the sprint football team and was part of a defense that allowed only 6.5 points per game his junior year. During his playing career, his teams went 14-4, including a share of the league championship his sophomore year, while registering 2 big wins over Army in both that year and in his very next season as a junior. So I'm very happy to welcome former Navy sprint football defensive back and also a fellow ex-Helo pilot, Mark Stordo, to the podcast. Mark, thanks for being with us. Now, you and I have exchanged texts, emails, and Facebook posts on Navy football for many years, so I am definitely looking forward to getting your take on the Navy secondary today.
Yeah, me too, Carl. Thanks for having me. And these are some great years in terms of Navy football, for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay, so we're going to get into our preview of the defensive secondary shortly, but right now I figured we'd give our listeners who aren't as familiar with sprint football a quick lesson, and we'll go ahead and start with how you wound up playing. When you were getting ready to apply to the Naval Academy and so forth, did you know about the sport before getting to Annapolis?
Yes, I did, Carl. I have an older brother, class of 77, who played 150s, as we used to call it back then. And I actually attended an Army-Navy game out at West Point when my brother was a junior. I think that might have been the fall of 75. And that really got me interested in the sport.
Okay. All right. So it's definitely on your radar before you even got there. So your brother played, and that's where you kind of got your first exposure to it. Now, one thing I'm always kind of curious about is when you're looking at a game like this where you're dealing with a weight limit, all right? In what situations when you're playing the game does that matter least, and when does it matter most?
I think the key difference with the weight limit, there are two. One is in the actual game, it feels faster because your linemen and your backs are all similar size and they're all quite fast. So when when I was in high school and the linemen were 220 or whatever, and I was 155 pounds, that's a pretty significant difference. And right. So it actually at times may have slightly affected techniques and stuff and how to get around a blocker and stuff like that. So. Okay,
cool. All right. So I think you kind of answered part of this question when we're talking about the game being faster. So what I'm hearing is that weight limit did impact team speed on a whole as it relates to speed by position across the board. Am I right?
Yes. And the other aspect that was different was in preparation for the games each week. It was kind of similar to wrestling for about half the team. Guys who were naturally 180 pounds or 175 pounds, we had a 158-pound weight limit 2 days before the game. They had to really work like wrestlers and sometimes put on plastics and go jogging after practice to get their weight down. And would be eating salad for dinner each night.
Wow. Okay. So did I hear that right? You're telling me that they actually had to lose like 20 pounds
Oh yeah.
before the weigh-in then. Now, how quickly and safely could they do that? I mean,
Yeah, well, keep in mind this was the early 1980s, so I don't know how safe it was, but they did it quickly. And Army, Navy, and Cornell were all very honest about the program. But we had suspicions, and some people may have verified from people they knew that the other teams weren't as strict on it. So we'd go up against a Princeton or a Rutgers, and they'd have some guys, that were 190 or 180, and they, because it was coach's honor.
Right.
And of course, Navy being what Navy is and Army being what they represent, we were very strict. If a guy was 0.2 pounds over, he had to put the plastics back on and go running some more.
All right. Yeah, that's really interesting. So now I'm kind of wanting to get into a little bit of the offense and the defense because, and by the way, thanks for sending me the team's record when you were a junior, because that was pretty helpful. But when we're talking about the offensive system, did you guys basically run some version of an option offense, or did you mimic what the D1 team did, or did you have your own thing going?
Yeah, we mimicked what the D1 team did. So it was pro set, kind of run heavy, but as you know, back then we threw a little more than they do today with the option.
Right, right. And is the same thing true of the defensive scheme?
Yes, yeah, we were in a 5-2. Doing the same as the big boys. So I think I'm pretty sure that the reason for that was if they ever had a rash of injuries or something and they needed to pick someone up from the 150s in a skill position, they at least wanted them to have a knowledge of the schemes and so forth.
Oh, yeah. That actually makes really good sense. All right, cool. So, Mark, let's get into your position a little bit. You played defensive back, and a couple of weeks ago when we had Andy Ponciego on the podcast, we were talking about some of the things that he keyed on to kind of help him get in the right position to make a play. So I'm kind of curious to see how that compares with what you look for when you're on the field against an opponent.
Yeah, I heard the podcast with Andy. I enjoyed it very much. And it's funny, as he was describing his focus on watching the guard as his primary key, it reminded me of what we did. So I was a cornerback on defense, so I was further outside than Andy was. And so from my angle, I was really reading the guard through the tackle. And within the first half second of the play, the first step those guys take, that would be the key for telling us if it was going to be a run or a pass and what direction the play was headed in.
Okay. All right, good. So similar keys from that perspective. And now let's talk a little bit about when you're squaring off against the receiver. I'm trying to remember if Navy's defensive scheme back then was more zone coverage or man-to-man. Can you help me out there?
Yeah, it was a fair mix. It might have been about 60-40 zone or maybe 50-50. We had about 6 or 7 different plays, that could be called in the huddle for the defensive backs. And it was either man-to-man or zone. And I'm pretty sure if you broke it down on film, it was either 50-50 or maybe 60-40 zone.
Okay. All right, cool. So now when we're talking about that kind of setup there, and you're opposite your receiver, whether you're in zone coverage or man-to-man, I'm wondering if there are certain things that you look for when you're opposite that receiver that would indicate to you whether he might be the primary target.
Yeah, no, we didn't really have any way to know that. Again, we were always focused, unless it was a man-to-man coverage. And even then, we had to have our head on a swivel and still had to look at that guard through tackle situation so we knew whether we were going to have a run or a pass. But yeah, when you're man, you can pretty much, focus on that guy and we watch their hips more than anything, because a good receiver will do all kinds of tricky jukes and everything else to try to throw you off where he's going. And if you start watching his head or some other things, you may be left in the dust.
Right. And then the last thing as it relates to that is, trying to get a sense for how you guys communicated defensively. Obviously, the one time when you can see defenses get exposed is when there's a breakdown in communications and all of a sudden somebody just comes wide open. What are some of the things, like say if the defense was calling a play in the huddle, you figure it's going to be a passing situation. Is there a lot of conversation going back and forth between, say, defensive backs and safeties based on what you're seeing to kind of help each other out, or how does that work?
Yeah, particularly in a zone coverage, you have to let them know when someone's coming into their area, and they do the same for you. And it's been a while now. I don't remember what terminology we may have screamed out, but probably just, you got one coming or whatever. But when we intercepted the ball, if I remember right, we would call bingo. Mm-hmm. And that told all the guys who were facing the play, who might not see you catching the ball, that, hey, it's time to start blocking now. We're on offense.
Okay. All right. That's pretty cool. Okay. And then last question, and then we'll start kind of getting into our preview. Now, I know when you and I used to play a lot of pickup football in flight school and so forth, and I loved catching the ball. But I was telling Andy a couple of weeks ago that if I had the size to play, I would probably be a defender, because that's what I did when I played lacrosse and so forth a little bit later on, that mm-hmm. sort of thing. And even when I play basketball, I do tend to prefer the defensive side of the ball. Okay. What did you like most about playing defense?
For me, it was really the physical part of the game. I enjoyed making a good square hit. High school and college, it was kind of the same. Of course, an interception is awesome, but my biggest thrill about the position and playing defense was when you really made a good hit. To me, that was the greatest gratification, more so than a fumble recovery or an interception or even a touchdown. And guys I know who played offense, for them, touchdown or, big runs were the biggest thing for them, but didn't compare to the big hit in my mind. So.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense. All right. Hey, Mark, thanks for cluing us in a little bit about the sprint football team. Let's go. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break right now. And then when we return, we'll go ahead and start getting into the Navy secondary. So don't go away. Okay, welcome back to Navy Sports Central, everyone. Carl Darden here with you, along with Mark Stordo, former cornerback on the Navy sprint football team. And now we're going to go ahead and get into our preview of the Navy defensive backs. All right, so Mark, as we look at the secondary, the first couple of words that come to my mind are experience and depth. All four guys, that being the two corners and the two safeties currently listed at number one on the depth chart, are seniors. And the guys backing them up either got a lot of time on the field last year, or they made some really big strides in learning the defense during the offseason and spring camp, which resulted in them moving up the depth chart. So we're going to go ahead and start with the boundary corner. And our guy there, who's number one on the depth chart, is Mikey McMorris. He is a 3-year starter and someone I know that you've always liked. He is 5'9", 173 pounds, and he is from Beaufort, Georgia. So what are some things about the way he plays that jump out at you?
I've loved watching him play. I think that his ability, he's got a nose for the ball in my view, and his ability to either break a pass up or, make an occasional pick or to come in and make a decent tackle has really impressed me.
Yeah. And that's exactly what some of the things that Coach Newberry was pointing out as well. I mean, obviously, he's not a really big guy. In fact, he could play on the sprint football team based on his size. Yeah. But he does know how to use his body well. And I've seen him just be a real master at using that body to deny the receiver the ball, especially going up against guys that are much bigger than he is.
Yeah.
And to your point, he's a very consistent tackler. I think that he just does a really good job getting into the legs of those ball carriers. And, when you are a defensive back out there, sometimes if you don't get him, it's, the next stop is the end zone. So he's definitely proven himself as a solid tackler. And by the way, speaking to your point about the pass breakups, he has in fact led the team in pass breakups over the last couple of years. So, good point there. Now, backing up McMorris at that position is a kid named Dre Grace. He is 6 feet, 178 pounds, and he is a sophomore from Port St. Lucie, Florida. He got on the field for a couple of plays last season and followed that up with a great spring. And then during the interview following spring practice, Coach Newberry made a point of saying that Grace was one of his big pleasant surprises because of the strides he took in learning the defense. And a couple of things he mentioned: he's working really hard in the weight room because he added about 13 pounds. and his film study was really strong. So what I wanted to do, Mark, is kind of get your take on that particular aspect of the game, that being the film study. What does that look like in the team room as you prepare for a game? How much time did you spend on it? And did you do any film study on your own?
Oh, sure. On today, I'm sure it's probably different than when we were playing in the early 80s. But typically they'll do that as a group, like the secondary probably does team, study together. The linebackers and maybe defensive ends will be in another group or what have you with their position coaches. So typically when you're going through film in preparation for a game and you're looking at the team, the opponent, the coach is going to be helping you with those keys, that Andy talked about and that, I mentioned today, and also a little bit about their tendencies, what the team might be likely to do on a 3rd and long or whatever the case may be. So I'm, pretty sure that's what they're focused on in their film study these days. Back when we played, in the 150s, we used to have an early lunch on the tea tables or whatever, and then we'd go to a position room in Loose Hall or something where we would do that kind of thing. But we would probably only get maybe an hour and a half of film work in each week, whereas I'm guessing these guys probably get hours in each week.
Right. Okay. Now let's go ahead and bounce over to the field corner position. And there we have Jamal Glenn. He is 5'11", 181 pounds, and he is a senior from Laurel, Maryland. Now, he did play a lot on special teams last year, but he started 2 games at corner when the mids got a little bit banged up, and probably his best game came against Memphis, where he had 5 tackles and he forced a fumble. So that Memphis game came at a stretch where the Navy defense was really kind of starting to gel, and they were looking more like their 2019 version. So when we look at the boundary corner versus a field corner, one of the things I've read is that the field corner has a little bit more responsibility for the field because he's playing on the not the short side, but I guess the long side would be the other way you can call it. So I was wondering, what are some of the things that he can do to kind of help him with his coverage responsibility, since he does have to cover a little bit more ground? I don't know when you played if they kind of broke up the cornerbacks that way. I know obviously in the option offense, there's a lot of near hash, far hash, that sort of thing. So
yeah, we called it strong corner and quick corner. And so the strong corner was what I played, and I would be next to the rover back. And we would go to the strong side of the formation. And surprisingly, somewhat frequently, that was on the short side of the field. But it could vary. So I just remember getting a lot of miles in every practice and game. Because as a corner, you're the furthest outside, we got a flip flop, you go running across the other way about 30 yards sometimes.
Right.
So that in itself keeps you in shape. But, when you have the wide side, you have to be a little extra careful because your buddies, your teammates, your help are further away. And so the last thing you would ever want to do is let anyone get outside of you.
Right. Yeah, I actually never thought about that. When you see these guys go in motion, if you got to track them all the way across the field, you've run 30 yards before the play's even started.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow. Okay. All right. So backing him up, we're going to have Caleb Clear. He is 6'1", 188 pounds, and he's from Memphis, which tends to be a pretty good recruiting ground for the academy. Last year, he started 3 games, including a solid defensive effort again against Memphis. So definitely a lot of experience at that position. So let me ask you this. When you see all those high-flying offenses that Navy has to go against in the American Conference, all the passing that goes, all the motion that they run and so forth, and the corners needing to be just totally on top of their game, do you find that position is perhaps one that they get a breather on a little bit more these days versus, a long time ago? Or am I missing something? Or are these guys just really, really in good condition where they can just kind of run for days?
Yeah, no, I think with these spread offenses and all the passing that's going on, they probably have more keys than we used to have, and they've got to know a lot more about the possibilities that they might face. So I give these guys credit for all the information they have to pack in every week and for every game, and to be able to process things quickly. I tip my hat to them because that's a taller order than what we used to face, in my opinion.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. All right. So we're going to move over to the bandit position. the number one guy going into summer camp is Mitchell West, and he's probably not that far from you, Mark. He is originally from Naperville, Illinois, and he goes 5'10", 192 pounds. Coach Newberry commented that West had a terrific spring practice, and it really solidified himself at that position. Last year, he started 6 games, and he wound up fifth on the team with tackles. I think he had a total of 50 to go along with a forced fumble. So obviously, when we're looking at somebody that plays strong safety, we kind of talked a little bit about this before when we were talking about your sprint career. What are some of the things that the Bandit can be doing or needs to do well when communicating with his defensive backs to make sure that you basically limit exposure and prevent a big play from breaking loose?
Well, it's a little different now than in the early 80s, and these guys have to be dialed in on a lot more information than we used to have to be. But the communications for all 4 of the guys in the secondary are really crucial. But I'm suspecting that the safeties are even more critical in that arena than the corners would be because they're typically in the middle of the field. The free safety can probably see a lot more than the other guys can see. And so especially with a leader like, Brennan, he's probably going to be yapping a lot more than the other guys.
Right. Okay, right behind Mitchell West, we have Taylor Robinson. He checks in at 6 feet, 195 pounds, and he's from Weldon Springs, Missouri. He's one of 2 guys that has not seen any action at all yet. So clearly he's been able to impress the coaching staff enough to jump up to number 2 there. Now, I haven't seen any film on him from high school, but I do know that he did play quarterback, and he was part of a team that won back-to-back state championships at the 6A level, and he was also heavily recruited by Air Force. So I did find out that he had a solid spring practice, and again, he's another guy that packed on some weight during since the end of last season. And I think that we already talked a little bit about what the Bandit needs to do to work well with the cornerbacks. Now let's talk about some of the physical tools, even like breaking down ideal size. What kind of physical tools can really help him play his position well?
Well, they're going to be occasionally facing these 300-plus pound linemen, especially the way Navy has such great blitzing schemes and everything else. So they've got to be able to deal with those linemen like a linebacker would, and they're obviously going to be a lot smaller. So they've got to have good quickness. They've got to have great strength in their upper body, and the ability to use their hands will be absolutely paramount to be able to shed those blocks and to get where they need to go.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. When you think about the type of offenses that Navy goes against in their conference, I mean, those guys are big. I mean, even when you look at how many pounds that the defensive line perhaps gives away on average, which is probably a solid, 20 to 25, it's probably slightly more when you start getting into the defensive backfield. So, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and move on to our last position, and that is the free safety. I'm actually going to start with a guy who's listed second on the depth chart, and that happens to be a sophomore named Colin O'Connor. He comes from Gonzaga High School right there in the D.C. area. In fact, he's actually teammates with current Navy players John Kelly, Mitchell Johns, and Aaron Davis, and also Malcolm Terry. Malcolm Terry is going to be a fullback versus a quarterback or slot back. But anyway, O'Connor goes 6'1", 191 pounds, and he really got the coach's attention in a couple different areas. One is in the area of performance analytics. O'Connor registered pretty high in some of the key metrics that the team uses, like max speed, how far players can run and maintain that speed, that sort of thing. That's a conversation that Coach Fitzpatrick and I had a couple of months back when he was talking about all the catapult technology that they use to evaluate their players. And then the second thing that got the coaching staff's attention was that, we talked about before where he had a couple of guys like Robinson add, 13 pounds onto their frame. O'Connor added 21. So, and no doubt that just about all that was muscle. So I always think about how that impacts, player performance if that does take a little bit of an adjustment. But even more importantly, I'm kind of curious to find out from you, Mark, when it comes to technology and so forth. There wasn't a whole lot available back then outside a stopwatch and a 40-yard time. what were the things that the coaches did use back then to kind of determine where people fell out on the depth chart?
Well, I think as far as where they're going to put people on a depth chart, back then, anyhow, that was more about what they saw in practice.
Mm-hmm.
They could tell if somebody came back and reported to camp out of shape, right? I remember I got sick once. I had 100-degree or so temperature, and I missed a practice or two, and I went from starting, this was senior year, I went from starting to number 3 or 4 on the depth chart. I had to work my way back up. But yeah, I think back then it was more just what they saw on the field, and they didn't use all the science that's used today to see how guys progressed in the offseason.
Right. Okay. All right, so now we're down to our last player, and that's Kevin Brennan. He is 5'11", 199 pounds, and he is the defensive co-captain from Westfield, New Jersey. Clearly a guy who's been out on the field a lot. Mark, just tell me what you like about this guy.
I'm really excited about Kevin Brennan. I love his physical play. I've seen him put some really nice big-time hits on people. He's got a nose for the ball. It would be, really rare to see his head out of the game. I just love the way this guy plays, and I'm excited about this year for him and for Navy's secondary. Expect a lot out of him, now that he's a senior and he's a captain. So.
Yeah, I agree. And I'm with you. I love the way he plays. And one of the things Coach Newberry said at the spring ball press conference after everything was over, he told the local media guys that Brennan's football IQ is just crazy high. I mean, it's basically off the charts. He sees things in film study that the other players don't see. Coach Newberry made a point of saying, sometimes I'll just go ahead and throw out a bonus question about, hey, what went wrong on this particular play? What are you seeing? And something that we haven't covered before. And it's usually Brennan who will just pipe up and say, oh, the defensive lineman was in the wrong gap that time, and that's why the play broke the way they did. So he sees the field really, really well. And like you said, he's a terrific hitter. And the only thing that, I kind of get scared at sometimes is that, sometimes I get worried about targeting calls, which are pretty debatable anyway sometimes. But he did miss part of the Air Force game. And the interesting thing was, as soon as he went out of the game is when things went south in that second half. That and a combination of the defense being on the field too long and just getting tired. That's understandable. But I'm with you. I love the way he plays, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how things go. So, all right. So that pretty much does it for our look at the secondary. You got a lot of good experience and depth here. Coach Newberry is very excited about this group of guys, and based on how they finished the season, I think that they have a really good chance of getting back to that 2019 form. What do you think there, Mark?
Yeah, I think so. I think that, and don't discount the possibility of some plebe rising quickly through the summer camp. It's been rare in recent years in Navy football not to see a plebe or two on the depth chart in the secondary come game 1 or game 2. So and we've got some strong senior leaders in this secondary, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if 1 or 2 plebes start rising in that depth chart at some point in the season.
Yeah, that makes sense, especially when you think back to 2016 when we had a pretty decent defense back then at the beginning of the season, but then one by one, they just started going down. And, being able to have that sort of depth is important. I think that was a pretty good lesson learned from back then. And that's why you do see occasionally those guys pop up and make a pretty good showing. So that's how I first noticed McMorris, when he got out there. So.
Yeah, I also expect our defense to be greatly improved over last year, not only because of some of the personnel, but because of the fact that they're able to practice this year.
Yeah, really. That makes total sense. Right. And I actually did some, kind of to back up your point there, I did some number crunching, and I looked at the defensive stats for the last 3 games of the season. That would be Memphis, Tulsa, and Army. And at least in terms of points allowed, now granted, it was a smaller sample size. You're only talking about 3 games versus 11. But the points allowed were less than what the teams allowed in 2019. And even if you look at the last 3 games of the season, that was the case. If you look at the last 3 games for each of those teams. So I think we can expect some pretty good things. And I know that Coach Newberry and the rest of the staff is pretty excited about it too. All right, so that does it for the preview of the secondary. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we'll be back in a little bit. Okay, we are back and glad you're still with us. We're going to go ahead and review the question of the day here shortly. But first, Mark, I wanted to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing these days. Share with us the type of business you're in and how people can reach out and get a hold of you.
Sure, appreciate it. As far as business, I have a business that I own and operate. It's executive search, headhunting, and I focus on placing salaried professionals in the manufacturing industry, the power generation industry, and in engineering consulting primarily. And mostly folks with backgrounds similar to ours, technical undergraduate degrees and possibly an advanced degree, and operations and engineering experiences. 80% of what I do for my clients.
Okay. All right. Good stuff. Now, how long have you been doing that? Because I know that we've been connected on LinkedIn for quite a while, and I do recall that that was a kind of career change for you, was it not?
It was, yeah. So previously, I'd been jack of various trades, but typically it was either sales and marketing related or operations related, and I've done things in a few different industries. And then it was 2013 when I arrived at a crossroads in my career and wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And for the first time in my life, I actually had a job eliminated, layoff sort of situation. So I did a little bit of the normal job search, got frustrated pretty quickly. I'm not someone who normally has a ton of patience when I'm trying to get something done. And I called my old buddy, classmate of ours, Bill Seaback, who's had a great career as a headhunter. And just wanted to connect with him with regard to opportunities. And then Bill sort of convinced me to, hey, why don't you try what I do? And, it made good sense. And Bill and I worked together for a while. And then after about a year and a half or so, for various reasons, I hung my own shingle, and, we're still in good touch and stuff. But he was a great trainer, by the way. And it's been a real blessing for me and my family to be able to have a career like this and have all the flexibility that comes with it. So.
All right, good deal. So if somebody was wanting to get in touch with you, is it normally companies that come looking for you or individuals, or do you handle both?
Yeah, well, it's companies or my clients. They ask me to fill positions for them. But of course, to fill those positions, you need candidates too. So, it's always helpful to hear from both potential clients and potential candidates.
All right. So if a potential client wanted to get in touch with you, what's the name of your company and what is the best way to connect?
Sure. It's Results Group Incorporated, and they could just reach out to me on my cell phone, which is 331-229-6298. But I also do have a website, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Okay. Very good. All right. Excellent. Let's go ahead and jump back into things here. And we're going to go ahead and go in with our question of the day from a couple of weeks ago. And here's what I asked to the group. If we were talking about the Navy linebackers, obviously. So the question was related to them. If I put the number of tackles Diego Fagot gets for the season at 100, are you taking the over or the under? Now, the one thing I did want to mention to you guys is that this is the listener participation part of the show. So a few weeks ago, we had some great responses when I was asking about, hey, what's your preference for a triple option quarterback? But I haven't heard from you guys since then. So remember, these aren't rhetorical questions. You can come back and answer by calling into the Google voicemail, which is 623-282-4896. And I also post these questions on our group, Navy Sports Nation Facebook page, so you can look for them and answer them there as well. So I know, Mark, you got an opinion on this. So what do you think? Over or under?
Well, I would go with the under. Realizing I could be wrong, but I just think with today's, potent offenses that are doing things all over the field, it's really hard for an individual player to accumulate 100 or more tackles. So I would go with the under, but if anyone could go over, it would be a guy like Diego Fagot. So.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that I'm going to go with the over just based on his track record so far. And I'm not saying it's going to be way over 100 because of what you just said and in terms of how the offense is run, because even in his best year so far as a sophomore, he had 101. And by the way, those are solo tackles plus assisted. So we're adding those numbers together. But anyway, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and take the over. I think that last year he ended up with 78 or so, and that was only in 10 games. So I think he might be able to get there. We'll see what happens. All right, sounds good. Now I'm going to go ahead and run through the question of the day for this episode, and I'll look for you guys to give some answers in a couple of weeks. If we take interceptions and pass breakups combined of the players that we discussed today, who do you think is going to wind up with the most? And again, you can respond via voicemail or text at the Google voicemail. 623-282-4896 is that number, or you can come back on the Facebook page as well. All right, Mark, so we're going to go ahead and get into what I think is going to be a pretty fun segment here, and this is our rapid fire Q&A. I'm just going to send you several questions and just give me the first answer that comes to mind, and I'll follow up with any kind of questions if it makes sense. So let's go ahead and get started. Most memorable win over Army?
That would be our 27-7 victory, our second class year.
Okay. All right. And what was, obviously, besides the lopsided score, was there anything else in particular that jumped out at you about that one?
Well, one thing I'll never forget. I remember late in the game, we were winning by a big score, and the coach, gave me a blow, so to speak. Hey, take a series off. And Jim Mooney, our classmate, who was backing me up at that point in the season, went into my spot, and the other number ones were still in. And a guy from the class of 83 named Ted Piccini was our rover back. Well, he had an interception on that series. And Ted and I had been, telling each other all year, hey, if we get a bingo, follow the other guy up the sidelines and we'll pitch it when we're getting tackled. And he did that. And Jim Mooney caught the ball and got knocked out at the 1 yard line. But it was such a shock to him that the ball ended up in his chest. I'll never forget that. So I was a little envious of Mooney for taking my glory.
That's pretty funny. Okay, most memorable win over a team that wasn't Army.
That would probably be that same season, our second class year, which was my last season because I missed senior year due to a knee injury. But we beat Rutgers pretty strongly. I think it was like 31-7 at home. I think it was our last game of the year that year.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Toughest teammate on defense?
I would say that's our classmate, Bob McGarity. Bob was a 4-year starter. He's one of those guys who had to cut weight, to make the weight for the game each week. And Bob was just a tough guy, tough as nails, played defensive tackle and nose guard. And I would have to say it was Bob. Okay.
All right. Good stuff. The one play you made that sticks out in your mind to this day?
That would be a pretty solid hit I made in the backfield against Cornell up in Ithaca, New York, my junior year. It was a tackle for about a 3-yard loss. Matter of fact, there was the timing of it and the form of it and everything else was so perfect that I couldn't believe the running back held onto the ball. and I think the momentum of the hit is what made him hang on to the ball. It just kind of flattened him. He landed on his back and I was still standing. He was in between my legs. And next thing I know, there were about 10 other guys slapping my helmet and saying things we can't repeat on this podcast.
Okay. Now we talked about making weight and stuff like that. And you did mention a couple of things, but was there any weird, I don't know if weird is the right word, but just some of the more creative things players did to make weight?
I was blessed, I suppose, with a natural body weight where I didn't have to deal with that too much. So when they were still at work, I was probably in my room. So I just remember plastics and guys running around McDonough Hall and stuff late at night, and I was glad not to be there.
Okay, yeah, for sure. Ideal number of FBS playoff teams?
I would say 16.
Okay. All right, that sounds good.
If you have less than that, you might miss a really good team that would have a shot at it. Maybe a smaller, a non-Power 5 conference champion or something who, very rarely would ever get the opportunity in the current format to take part.
Okay. All right. Sport you would have played at Navy if you didn't play sprint football?
for me and my desires and everything back then, I would say probably the, varsity football with the heavies. I don't think I would have ever seen the field, but I would have been a great meat squad guy.
Okay. Favorite non-football sports movie?
Miracle. I love ice hockey.
Oh yeah. Yeah. That was a good one. For me, I played, baseball in high school. So for me, it would have been the comedy Major League, with Tom Berenger and Charlie Sheen. I can kind of relate to that one a little bit because there was this character named Pedro Serrano who was played by Dennis Haysbert, the Allstate guy.
Yes.
He could crush a fastball, but could not come close to hitting a breaking pitch, until the very end of the movie, that is. That was me in high school. I mean, I could hit most fastball once I got my timing down, but the reason my career ended with early retirement is because I just couldn't hit a breaking pitch to save my life on a consistent basis. So I was actually Pedro Serrano with warning track power because I couldn't reach the fences either. So there wasn't much of a market of that. I mean, there wasn't much of a market for that in college baseball. So that's why I retired very quickly. So,
and, reflecting back on some of your comments earlier in this podcast, you were thinking if you played football, you would have been a defensive guy. Based on my experiences with you around the touch football field down in Pensacola, I would have swore that you would have been a great receiver for what it's worth.
Oh, well, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's that was a lot of fun those days. It was a great way to blow off steam for sure going through flight school. So
absolutely. And, we got the Ponce out there. We had some other guys who played D1 at times. We had some fun and it was kind of competitive.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, best innovation in college football in the last 30 years?
Probably the highly potent offenses these days with the spread and all the passing that's going on is what I would say.
Yeah, for sure. One thing I've seen in this game, and I'm sure you'll agree as well, is things are constantly evolving. So the defenses now are kind of starting to figure out ways to create some confusion. And Coach Newberry's scheme is a pretty good example of that. So we'll see if that forces the offenses to take another step to evolve a little bit more in the future. All right, Mark, that pretty much takes things to a close here. I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast. I would definitely like to jump in and see if we can do this again sometime during the season, maybe previewing a big game on the schedule or something like that. So if you're up for that, maybe we can give that a shot.
Yeah, that'd be great, Carl. I appreciate the invite. Always love talking about Navy football.
All right. Thanks a lot, man. You take care.
All right.
All right, everybody, we're in the home stretch, but before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask for an assist from you guys. One thing that helps podcasts like Navy Sports Central get some traction is through the social proof provided from ratings and reviews. Now, there's no doubt that word of mouth is the best form of advertising, but if you do leave a review, assuming your directory has a way to do that, it's going to always be there for people to see. So if you've listened to the last couple of episodes and you've gotten a little bit more excited about the Navy football season, please take a minute or two to rate the podcast. That would really, really help. Now, based on what I see from my data, most of the downloads are going to iPhones, so writing a review on Apple Podcasts is pretty straightforward. If you already follow Navy Sports Central, all you have to do is locate it in your library and then scroll down just past episode 0, which is the trailer. And you'll see where it says ratings and reviews. All you have to do is tap 5 stars and it should say submitted. Writing a review is optional, but you can see the box to tap on there to get into the dialog box. Now, for those of you with Android phones, Podchaser is the only directory I know of right now where you can leave a review. If that happens to be yours, it's super easy. The ratings box is right there in the top right. Once you locate the podcast, just tap on 5 stars and you're good to go. My goal is to get 20 reviews by the end of August. The more the better, of course, but I think 20 is a pretty realistic number. So I definitely appreciate any help you could give me there. All right, that's going to do it for this edition of Navy Sports Central. Thank you all so much for joining us. Now, if you like what you've heard, remember to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, and be sure to spread the word to all the other Navy fans out there. I also wanted to thank our guests, former Navy cornerback from the sprint football team, Mark Stordo, for his great insights. Remember that you can respond to our question of the day by calling or texting 623-282-4896. Again, that's 623-282-4896. And you can also respond through our group Facebook page. And just a quick reminder, the views expressed on Navy Sports Central are my own and do not reflect those of the U.S. Naval Academy or Navy Athletics. By the way, the music used on Navy Sports Central podcast comes to you from Audio Jungle. This is a great resource for purchasing the rights to use music from thousands of artists around the world, and those we feature in our podcast will be credited in our show notes. Talk to you soon, everybody. Until next time, this is Carl Darden. Go Navy, beat Army.